everyone, welcome back to the Way Out West YouTube channel. Rob here, President of the club. We have two great gigs coming up on this long weekend. On the Sunday we have the fabulous Hussey Hicks coming down to play for us. I seen the girls play at Broadbeach Blues Festival last year and they blew me away, and it was a must-have for the club. Then on the Monday, and it is a 2 p.m. gig because it is a holiday, we have the incredible Australian blues band Chain in the house. I just got to interview Phil Manning, so I hope you enjoy the interview. Phil was very funny and he went way back, 55 years to the beginning of Chain, and he let us in on a few little secrets. So I hope you enjoy the video. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button, and rock on, my friends. We'll see you on one of the gigs this weekend. Bye for now. I've been reading this terrific book at the moment called Tomorrow is Today. It's about Australia and the psychedelic era from 66 to 1970. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a ripper.
No.
Am I correct in saying that it was Wendy Saddington who changed the name of a West Australian band called The Beaten Track to The Chain with a V, and she got that name from the classic Chain of Phil song?
Well, what actually happened was I went across to Perth and joined the Beaten Tracks, and then a few, which was a pretty poppy band, great musicians. But we got to Melbourne, and I don't even know how Warren and Murray Wilkins, the bass player, found Wendy, but they did. And so we decided to get Wendy as our singer, and we went up and rented a farm up in the hills somewhere for a week to rehearse, learn new material, write material, that sort of thing. And at one stage we were just sitting around in the evening, probably having a smoke and a drink, I'd imagine, from memory, and thinking, okay, what do we call the band? And it was that time, 1968, and we were probably, I can't remember the actual names we were coming up with, but they probably would have been things like the psychedelic mushrooms, or the purple turnips, or something like that. And Wendy was just sitting there quietly, and she just said, "Call the band fucking Chain." And that was it. And it was just Chain. And it always has been just Chain, except when Michael Gudinski took over the management of us in 1970, late 70 or early 71, he absolutely insisted on calling it The Chain. And so we went through this period of being The Chain, but really from Wendy onwards, it was just Chain.
You before you went to Chain, you had stints with Bay City Union and the Laurie Allen Review. I never ever got to see Wendy Saddington perform live. I believe I've heard her on record, she had an incredible voice, but was she a tough woman to work with?
Wendy was an absolute, just a gorgeous soft little lady. She was, look, I mean, she was a sort of, she was a gay woman before you were supposed to be allowed to be. And she was a sensitive little soul. She was tough, she wouldn't take any shit, but she was actually a very, very sensitive wee soul. And but she just had this amazing presence. When she was a shy little thing. She would sit around and not say a word, and then she'd walk on stage and just devastate the audience. She just had, I don't know what it was, whether it was it was everything. It was a hairstyle, the fact that she just wore denim and looked like a tough little tough little chick from the suburbs or something, But she was actually, as I said, she was a sensitive wee soul.
Yeah, that's incredible. You remind me when you say that, it's like our own departed, beautifully loved Chris Wilson. Chris is very quiet off stage, and he gets on stage and he becomes a different persona.
Yeah. Well, I've seen that with Chris because I worked with him a few times here and there, and yeah, just a very quiet and quiet, very sensitive guy. But yeah, walk on stage and bang.
Who else was in that original chain with you, Phil, way back then?
Warren Morgan was the keyboardist, playing a Hammond. Murray Wilkins was the bass player, and Murray, both Warren and Murray were from a jazz background. In fact, Murray went back to Perth and ended up becoming the head of a music department at the uni or something. Very, very, very accomplished musicians in the jazz scene. And the drummer, of course, was Ace Follington. And Ace lives back in Perth now. But Ace, of course, he's been with so many different big bands, mainly in the Sydney area, and and backed all the great American artists. So it was quite a musical act, actually. I was the kid on the block. I learned an awful lot about music from Warren and Murray in particular.
Chain's first single in those formative years was Show Me Home, which some say is the first ever Australian progressive blues record. Did you set out not to be like a normal blues cover band that a lot of Australian artists did, but to put an Australian spin on what you did with the blues?
Well, we weren't even actually that interested in being a blues band. I love blues, and I'd been listening to it for a few years, and but we were influenced at the time by all the stuff that was happening from England. So by the time we did Show Me Home, we were more influenced by bands like Traffic and the band Music from Big Pink. And really, at the end of the day, Show Me Home was my attempt to write a song like The Weight, or one of the band's sort of takes on things. So it was very influenced by that area, and even though we played some blues material, like we always did, a B.B. King song here or there, or Tampa Red or something like that. It wasn't until Matt Taylor joined the band that we became a sort of hard-nosed blues band, really.
I was reading also the first LP released by Chain was the live album recorded in Sydney's Caesars Palace. Do you have much recollection of that? That would have been a wild place back up there, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, we'd actually had a residency at the Caesars Palaces. Caesar's places, and Warren decided he was going to join Billy Thorpe, the Aztecs, and Glenn Mason decided he was going to go to England, and so that just left Barry Sullivan, Barry Harvey, and myself. So on the Saturday night, we did our last show together, and on the Sunday, we just basically set our gear up in the corner of the club somewhere, and had a few friends in there, and recorded the album, basically just as a, just to have a memory of it, really. And I always like to tell a guy named John Zalaika recorded it on a Revox 2-track. and he had 2 or 3 little Japanese battery-powered mic mixers that had volume controls and nothing else. And we just used ordinary vocal mics to record everything, and it was done live. And I always remember that it cost us $34 to record the album. And that was, I think, to pay for batteries and things like that for John Zuleika. And we bought 2 bags of dope. So we actually spent $60 on smoking gear. So we can honestly say we spent twice as much on drugs as we did on recording the album.
Classic.
But then the silliest thing was the album got put out and started to get into the charts. And of course, Warren was in the Aztecs, Glenn was in England, and Barry, the 2 Barrys and I were a trio up in Queensland by then, before we got Matt. So the album sort of, we got no promotion whatsoever. I mean, when you look at the history of Chain, it's one disaster after another. It's just a catastrophe, really. But you know, you got to laugh about it, though.
I as a youngster, 17-year-old, obviously went to the Sunbury festivals. I remember you sitting up on stage playing, not with Chain. Do you have much recollection of those early Sunbury festivals?
Not a great deal, actually. I was in during that period, I was in a pretty strange place. I was in and out of Chain. I attempted to do solo things. My first marriage was an unmitigated disaster. Although I've got 2 beautiful daughters, you know. But so yeah, I was in a pretty strange state, and I wasn't quite a hippie, but I was pretty close to it. And so some of it I remember quite clearly. Other aspects of it I don't remember at all. But you know, like, you know, from year to year, I mean, I remember one year. There was one year that I remember it really quite clearly, because in that year I stopped smoking, I stopped drinking, I didn't take any drugs, I didn't, you know, I was a vegetarian, and I've got a pretty clear recollection of that particular time. But the other ones I don't remember much about, really.
The audience probably doesn't either, mate. The classic lineup of Chain is obviously yourself, Big Goose, Little Goose, and of course Matt Taylor. When and where did you meet Matt? And when he came on board, you mentioned before he really steered towards a blues orientation.
Well, it's a funny story, but I came over from Tasmania and join Tony Worsley and the Blue Jays. And we toured around. It ended up way up north in Queensland on the showground circuit, of all things, and I hated it. And so I left and came back to, gradually got back to Melbourne, and I knew no one really, but there was a little coffee shop down in Toorak, somewhere, South Yarra, somewhere down there, where all the musicians used to gather after their gigs. And I was basically, I was broke and I was homeless, and I went there, and I got sort of got picked up and looked after by a prostitute who, you know, I had to sort of stay out until 1 or 2 in the morning while she worked, while she did her thing, and then I could go back to her place and sleep there, you know. And so I had somewhere over. But, well, my father came over from Tasmania. I've got no idea to this day how he found me. But he actually found me and said, "Look, you know, son, you're broke. you're homeless, you're broke, you should come back home, and maybe you can come back to Melbourne and have another go at it later on or something like that. I wasn't having a bar of that. And I'd read where this band called the Bay City Union in St Kilda were looking for a guitar player. And I had all I had really with me was a bag and my guitar case. And I said, look, Dad, I'm pretty sure I've got a job with this band. Of course, I hadn't even met them. Oops, where have you gone? I touched something here and you vanished.
I can still see you all right, though.
You can still see me. Okay, well, that's good. That's
keep going on.
That's something. Hang on, I'll just hit there. Well, I can see you now. Anyway, so Dad said, all right, well, hop in the cab. I'll take you down there to St Kilda. So I went in and knocked on the door of this flat where the Bay City Union were. They actually had two flats, one upstairs and one downstairs. I went upstairs and knocked on the address I had, and Glenn Wheatley opened the door, and he was the rhythm guitarist in the Bay City Union. And I said, and I had actually met these guys briefly at a gig in Brisbane called The Scene, but when I was with Tony Worsley, and Glenn opened the door, and I said, I believe you guys are looking for a guitar player. And he said, yeah, that's right. And I said, okay, hang on, I'll get my bags. And I went down and said, okay, Dad, I've got the gig. I'll give me my, I'll grab my bags and my guitar. I'm out of here. Thanks, Dad. Bye. In the meantime, Glenn Wheatley had run downstairs to Matt Taylor's flat and said, you remember that blonde guitar player with Tony Worsley? Matt said, yeah. Glenn said, he's just joined the band. He's just announced that he's joined the band. He's moving in. What'll he do? And Matt said, I seem to remember he was okay. Well, then we'll let him go for a while. So that was how Matt and I got together in the Bay City Union.
Fantastic. When you guys signed to the Infinity label and you recorded which is now a legendary album, Towards the Blues, it was a mix of classic and old blues and standout originals. What was the process of writing songs, the originals? Did you and Matt write together, or were you the main songwriter on that album?
We were a rather communist band, actually. We were a very socialist band. A lot of the stuff sort of evolved, really. When Matt came and joined the band, we'd been working as a trio, and we'd sort of carried over some of the material from when Warren Morgan and Glyn Mason were in the band. We carried over some of that material. We'd learnt some new material, like we did some really weird. I remember we did something like a 7/8 version of Crossroads, if you can believe that. It was a very odd band. Anyway, so when Matt joined the band, we had to basically start playing straight away. So we got together and came up with, some of the standard things like Dust My Broom and that sort of thing. And I had already had that little riff for Black and Blue, and Matt said, I could really write a good work song around that. So he went off in the corner and wrote the words down. We actually wrote and learnt that in the first rehearsal. And Matt and I had actually, in the Bay City Union, we'd done a little bit of writing together. But at that time, we tended to get something and jam on it. And I think the more stoned we got, the more we used to jam. And we'd be in the van on the way to a gig, and someone might suggest, listen, why don't in that particular song, why don't we put a middle part in it? Or why don't we change the riff to this or that? and so that's what we did. We actually developed things as we went along, and so by the time we got to recording Toward the Blues, those songs had sort of evolved, if you like, and it wasn't as if we deliberately wrote them or I think from memory, for instance, like our version of 3220, which is probably more like it's more akin to Skip James 2220, really. But I had that guitar lick, that guitar lick thing, and Matt just sang the words to 3220 over it, and it evolved into that version. And so when we went into the studio to record Toward the Blues, we were just trying to recreate what we did on stage and try and capture that magic that the band could pull off when we were on stage. And we were in the studio for a couple of days or so, and we were getting absolutely nowhere. Like it was just dreadful, really. We just couldn't get it together. And then I don't know what it was, whether we probably had something to drink and, we had a joint or something. And we hit this magic spot, and the whole album got done in a space of hours, just in a matter of a few hours. And that included recording the tracks and then putting down some overdubs. And then, of course, we went back the next day or so and mixed it. But the actual album itself was recorded in a very short period of time.
Oh, wow. So that brings me to my next question. I mean, the single Black and Blue on the phenomenal album, the impact of the album, you're on top of the world then, but why would then the Two Gooses and you leave the band when it was on such a great roll?
We were burnt out. As I said, it was a weird time. We were young men who got married too young. Got married, started having kids, and we were only just in our early 20s, and we were playing 5-6 nights a week, doing an afternoon gig on a Saturday, then a Saturday night gig. We were making sort of reasonable money for a band in those days at that time. But we were away from home for weeks on end. It was very hard. And as I said, we just burnt out. Everyone started playing cricket, and I think that was, Matt formed the Northcote Gentlemen's Batting and Bowling Association, and there were the Stanley Street Cricketers or something, and all these musicians used to get together on a Saturday, Sunday afternoon and play cricket. And it was a bit like a diversion, really. Yeah. And we were just, everyone was working too hard, touring too much, and in my case, I started to get really upset because I wasn't really into playing cricket, and I was very creative at the time, writing, practicing, and I could see very clearly that we were going nowhere quick, because we weren't getting new material. We'd had Black and Blue, we'd had Judgment, and it was just sort of, we weren't learning new material, and so I got really jacked off there. Little Goose wanted to play jazz, so he went off to play jazz, and we replaced him with Kevin Murphy, and then Barry Sullivan went off. He went off to do something or another. I don't know. I can't remember what it was, but and then we got Charlie Tamahai on bass. And then I don't know. At that point, I got jacked off with it, and went off and tried doing some solo stuff. Tried a couple of little bands. I had a band of Talabini, and then Willie and the Phil Tones.
I was going to ask you that. My next question was Mighty Mouse. You did some work as Mighty Mouse, and
well, what Mighty Mouse was once again a singer named Barry McCaskill put together this jam thing, and he had two drummers, Little Goose and Kevin Murphy, and I got asked to go along and jam on that. Barry Sullivan was the bass player, and Ian Klein was the keyboard player, I think, at that time. And then anyway, what ended up happening there was Barry Sullivan, Barry Harvey, the Mal, the sax player, Ian Klein, and myself basically departed and called it Chain again. So, yeah, as I said, Mighty Mouse, we did one Sunbury as Mighty Mouse. And on the Sunbury album, there's a big, long, drawn-out thing called Sunset Song.
Yeah, I know. I was there. Shane recorded an album later on called Two of a Kind, with I believe, contributions from the Muddy Waters touring band. How did that come about, Phil?
Well, on the first tour, the guitar players in Muddy's band were Sammy Lawhorn and Pee Wee James Madison. And one morning, about 1 o'clock in the morning at the hotel in Sydney, there's a knock on my door, and I opened the door, and it was Pee Wee with his guitar around his neck. And he said, "Hey, Phil, I've written this song and I want to record it with you guys." And I went, "Well, oh, really?" And so he played it to us, and I don't know how it happened, but from then on in, Gudinski organised it, and when we got to Melbourne, we went into the studio with Pee Wee Madison, Sammy Lawhorn, and Mojo Beauford. Sam got pretty pissed, and he was fighting with Pee Wee over who should play what guitar part. So he ended up being sent home in a cab. So it just left Pee Wee and Mojo, and we just recorded some blues things and Two of a Kind. And there wasn't enough material for a whole album. So we put that big, long, extended jam thing on the other side called How to Set Fire to an Elephant. And,
yeah, I remember that. I was lucky enough to see Mojo Beauford play. I think he toured with Louisiana Red many years ago. So, yeah, that was great to see those two guys.
Yeah, I actually just a friend of mine just gave me an album of Mojo Beauford's.
Yeah,
it's great harmonica player.
You did go off and do some work with John Paul Young's All Star Band. That would have been a lot more poppier than you would normally be playing.
Yeah, well, as I've always sort of said, I started out more interested in pop music than I grew up on the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, for heaven's sake. That's what I loved. And then the Yardbirds and all that stuff. And then along the way, bit by bit, I just fell more and more in love with blues music. And it was a thing of tracing, reading about Keith Richards talking about Chuck Berry. So going and finding Chuck Berry records, and then reading where, someone heard Robert Johnson and going and tracking that down. So it was very, very much a sort of discovery thing that I got into blues, and I loved it. But in 1977, I think it was, I was doing a little bit of work with a trio, and sharing a house with Jim Keys in Caulfield somewhere, and I got asked to fill in on guitar for John Paul Young, and I must admit I really quite enjoyed it, because we did a couple of quite big tours. We were always stayed in nice accommodation. We were well treated, and it was fun going out and playing to all these screaming girls. It was it was great, and it was a great band. I mean, Warren Morgan was the musical director, and Ronnie Peel, Rockwell T. James was on either bass or rhythm guitar, depending on who. Had a wonderful bass player for a while there named Dallas. Johnny Dick was the drummer, great drummer. So it was a hot band, it was a bloody good band. And then of course I recorded guitar with them on the Green album, and it's actually, and that was with Harry Vander and George Young producing. And so that was a great experience working with them in the studio, because it's interesting to see how some producers work. They all have their different styles of doing things, and Harry and George were fantastic to work for.
But sort of jumping ahead now to 1982, the reformed classic Black and Blue chain played at the 10th anniversary of the Mushroom Records Evolution concert. That must have been a pretty special gig for everyone involved, playing in front of thousands and thousands of people.
Yeah, well, I think we were all sort of used to playing in front of big crowds. In fact, I worked a couple of times. Once with John Paul Young, another time in the house band on the steps of the Opera House, and that was like 120,000 people or something.
Wow.
And so we're pretty used to working in front of big crowds, festival crowds, that sort of thing. So I always laugh about the one doing in the house band at the on the steps of the Opera House. And one of the artists that we had to back was Norman Gunston. And that was just wonderful. That was absolutely, it was hilarious.
He was a very funny man. He was more an actor than a comedian, I think. The way he could take on, that interview.
Well, actually, Gary McDonald, the actual fellow, backstage, he was much funnier than Norman Gunston. He was just. I know that I'm aware that he's had sort of psychological issues to deal with, but I thought he was just absolutely delightful fellow and so funny.
What about later on? You guys went on a tour called the Blues Power Tour. That was a who's who of Australian artists at the time. Can you tell us much about that?
Well, I don't remember a great deal about it, actually. Well, I mean, we had some great time. It was a great band. We had Brolga on bass from the Goanna band. We had the Reverend on keyboards, and Rob Dylan was the drummer. So it was, and that was an interesting thing, because Rob really was not a blues drummer. He was a powerhouse drummer, and strangely enough, it worked an absolute treat with that lineup. And then, of course, there was Matt and myself with Broderick Smith as the front line, and it was that was a great tour, and we played on Hey Hey It's Saturday even.
Oh, wow.
There you go.
I didn't know this until I was doing a bit of research that a very young Jeff Lang played with Chain for a little while.
Yeah. He was in Matt's Matt Taylor Chain there for a while, and I think he recorded Always Land on Your Feet with. I think that's the one that he recorded with Matt. I might be wrong there, but yeah, he definitely did an album with Matt there. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Now, just jumping forward a little bit, current bass player, he's been with the band for a long time now, Dirk Dubois, a really nice guy. He came on board in 1995. What was Dirk's background?
Well, I met Dirk. He'd been playing with Matt, and an interesting story there. Matt and I went to Tasmania to do some shows, and that was with a drummer and a bass player from Launceston. And anyway, we turned up a couple of days early to rehearse with the bass player and drummer. And the drummer turned up, but there was no bass player. And it turned out that the week before, the bass player had found Jesus and decided that he didn't want to play the devil's music because he'd found Jesus. And so we were in a panic then. And Matt said, let's see if I think Dirk at the time, he was living in Adelaide, I think. He may have been working with Chris Finnan there, I'm not sure. But Matt said, why don't we let's see if we can get Dirk. So we had to fly Dirk over in a real hurry. But luckily, Dirk knew the material, see, so because he'd worked with Matt before. So that was sort of how I started working with Dirk. I don't know a great deal of Dirk's background history actually before we started working together.
When you mentioned finding Jesus, I remember having tickets to Little Richard at Festival Hall, and he found Jesus and stopped playing, and I never got to see Little Richard. Oh, now I've lost my spot there. Yeah, we were talking about Little Goose before, Barry. He had a unique way of playing, and you mentioned that he went off to play jazz, but the way he held the sticks was so different from other drummers that I've seen. He really did have that jazz. You know, he wasn't a basher or anything like that.
Well, he was a wonder boy, one of those wonder boy drummers. He was playing jazz and playing in big bands when he was about 9 years old. Like there's photos of him playing with all these horn players and stuff, and he's just a kid, and they're all grown men, and he's just he's in short pants, So and his favourite drummers have always been people like Jack DeJohnette and the real dyed in the wool jazz stuff. He just adores. That was just it. And so he learnt to play in that orthodox manner, and so consequently, he holds his, that sort of classic way of holding a drumstick that way in the left hand. and he had a very bad car accident when he was about 18, and they had to put an 8-inch steel plate in his left arm, and basically the surgeon told him he'd never be able to turn his hand round to play that orthodox jazz way, but he just persisted and forced himself to do it eventually. So he ended up with the strongest left arm that, I mean, I've lost half my hearing because of his left hand, I'm sure of it. But that's right, and he played like a jazz player, very much a jazz player, and you can hear that in the early Chain stuff, you know, toward the blues in particular. You can hear that influence of you know, even though it was a loud band, he had that very light jazz touch, particularly on the cymbal side of it, you know.
Wasn't there a drum bit on towards the blues? Is it Albert Goose is going to turn the blues loosest now, or something like that?
Yeah, Albert Goose is going to turn the blues loosest
That's
now.
it. Yeah, I remember. But let's jump ahead now. 2002, the Long Way to the Top tour. Sadly, so many of our beautiful musicians have passed on, but boy, you must have been telling some stories back of stage on that tour, you guys.
Yeah, it was hilarious, and some of the stories were just outrageously funny. You know, that particularly some of the stories from the guys that were in the late 50s and early 60s, the ones that were sort of that, you know, sort of 10 years older than us. You know, that sort of some of their stories were just outrageously funny, and like just one in particular that really just cracked me up was I think it was the original drummer in the Aztecs, Louis Watson or something, one of those guys anyway. He was saying how we were talking about everyone getting older and having lines, and he said, so my wife and I were going to a party and we decided we wanted to try and look really young. So we got some Piles ointment and rubbed it into our skin, into our faces, which of course tightened all the skin up. He said, so we went off to the party, and by the time they got there, they couldn't sort of change their expression. So they had this sort of permanent smile on their face that wouldn't change. And if they laughed, it was like their skin was cracking. And anyway, I guess you had to be there, but it was just a really, really funny story. And there was an awful lot of that went on backstage, I tell you.
Little Goose retired in 2015, and Trevor Trapper Draper came into the band. And we've spoke about Little Goose, he could never be replaced, but he's been a mighty fine addition to Trapper has to Chain. Yeah, well, you know, one thing about
Little Goose, Little Goose is nothing short of a genius. You know, I mean, he was just a genius player. That's simple as that. But a lot of the time, you didn't know what he was going to do next, and he'd do these most outrageously different things. And I mean, normally, if a drummer had done some of the stuff that Little Goose did, the band would have fallen apart. But he could pull it off. You know, he could actually do a lot of this outrageous stuff. But it made it at times unpredictable, and you know, there was a certain amount of tension that went on there with that. But then, of course, the poor little bugger became unwell and couldn't tour. And once again, we had to get Trapper in a hurry, because 2 weeks before a tour, Little Goose rang me up and said, "Look, I can't do it. I'm not well. I can't do it." And so I immediately rang Matt up and said, "Shit, what are we going to do? Do you want me to look? Do you want me to sort of find someone here in Melbourne and work them in?" And Matt said, "Well, I've been going to Adelaide and playing with Chris Finnan's band. Trapper knows a lot of the chain material." And so we got Trapper in, and he's been mighty. He's a great drummer, great guy, easy to work with, and he sort of brought a consistency to the band that wasn't quite there before. We may not go quite off on as odd tangents as we did, but I think as an overall performing act, it's a lot more constant now, and we spend our time enjoying playing rather than trying to second guess what's going to happen next.
Our club Way Out West, we're into, I think, 21st year, and chain has been part of our history. Some of the biggest shows we ever had at the old RSL with chain. And you guys still hold the bar taking record too, which is a proud record. I don't think it'll ever be broken.
Well, there's a lovely one. There's a lovely one that goes along with that. Years ago, chain played at the Bridgetown Tavern in South Australia, and it was absolutely chock-a-block. And at the end of the night, the manager came up to Matt and I and said, "Come to the bar. I'd love to buy you boys a drink. It's the biggest bar take ever." And we went, "Oh, well, wow." And he said, "Yeah." He said, "Cold Chisel actually got more people, but you guys hold the bar record." And Matt said, "Oh, really? Who held it before?" And he said, "Oh, you did." So I think it sort of says something about chain audiences, I think.
I remember Matt saying, with the first time you played out in the back room, and it was a Sunday afternoon, and you looked around, you said, how come there's so many blues fans here on a Sunday afternoon in an RSL? That was fantastic. You've been such a part of our history. We've loved it. On a more personal note, though, Phil, I see you've been posting some photos of your paintings. You're a really great artist. I know Philippa is as well. So how long have you been dabbling in the painting?
Well, I went through high school. Art was my best subject at high school, and I loved painting. Then I went off to art school. I was going to be an art teacher, but I only lasted there about 6 months, and then I joined Tony Worsley and the Blue Jays because I actually didn't really want to be an art teacher. I would have loved to have been an artist, but I was doing an art teacher.
You are an artist.
Well, I am now, yeah. But so over the years, I've every now and again I've got the oils out or the acrylics out, and done a bit of painting. And then when we had the lockdown and there were no gigs, I don't know how it happened. So I thought, I'm going to do a bit of painting again, and I've never used gouache before. For those who out there who might wonder what gouache is basically a watercolor, but it's more opaque than watercolor, and so it sort of acts. It acts a bit like oils in a way. It's water based, And I started using gouache, and I found a real affinity for it. And I've got a painting studio a little painting studio in the backyard, but it's not heated. And right through winter, I couldn't get out there. I can't possibly paint with oils in the house. Philippa would divorce me in about 2 seconds flat. There'd be paint everywhere, you know. But I found with gouache, I just sit at the front table and paint. And I've been painting and painting. I went, I think about 250 paintings I've done in the last, year and a half, really. And most of them are dreadful, I think, but some of them have come out really well. And as I've sort of got older, I've got a little bit of arthritis in one of my hands, which it cuts down the amount of playing that I want to do. And not only that, I'm limiting myself a bit with my playing now to just doing chain and doing things that I really want to do. And the rest of the time I'm painting. And so I'm having an exhibition, my first little exhibition in late July at Mario's in Fitzroy. And it's a lovely cafe restaurant, and it's not sort of like a big whiz-bang opening or anything like that. It's just your paintings go up on the wall, they stay there for a couple of weeks, and people can enjoy them or buy them or what have you.
Oh, well, I'll make sure we get over there. Well, that's about all I've got, Phil. I really appreciate you taking the time. Wendy says to say hello too. She's at work.
Oh, lovely.
We're really proud.
Two gorgeous girls.
Yeah. Well, Tara, the youngest one, she's in the police force now.
Goodness gracious.
Yeah, she's 25, but she's not allowed to come down to way out west and arrest any old hippies. That's the only thing that we've said to her. But it's okay. But yeah, thank you so much for having a chat. We are so much looking forward to seeing you as part of a 55th anniversary tour at Way Out West. And it's going to be great to see you guys again. So thanks very much.
Yeah, well, we Chain have not actually played at the Newport venue, no. I don't think.
No. We're with lockdown and all that, and we could never line up the stars.
Yeah.
Matt's in WA and Dirk's up north. So, all right, mate. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and we'll see you.
Yeah, thank you, Rob.
No worries, mate. All the best.
And we'll see you there.
You better believe it. See you, man.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.